Hi, I'm Norma Melton, the founder of WireKnits, and today we're going to review tools, the tube wringer specifically, light-duty tube wringer and the heavy-duty tube wringer. The light-duty tube wringer is what we use to crimp wire knits, both in the heavy gauge and the fine gauge. And the heavy-duty tube wringer is what I use to crimp just bare, heavy wire, things that we use to design on wire knits with. So let's get started. Okay, we're going to start with the light-duty tube wringer. You can see that this is a nylon roller on here and it doesn't damage the wire knits, but you have to be very careful how much pressure you actually apply to this compression chamber, because you could end up actually damaging the wire knits if you press too hard. But I can show you that we start out with wire knits in the 1000 series about 5/8 of an inch wide, and then when you pull it in length it turns into this, which is a little more than 1/4 of an inch wide, and then when you run it through the tube wringer to crimp it, that's what it turns into. So it still is the same width, it's just that it's crimped. So I'll show you how to do all of that. Starting with, this happens to be the turquoise color, and I'm just going to show you how easily it stretches in length. So I'm pulling it in length, and you can see that it started out wide, here it is narrow, and let's say I only want to run this amount through the tube wringer. I open up the jaws on the tube wringer, pull it through just slightly, press down on the back so it's now clamped in there, but it's not, I'm not pressing hard, and I'm just getting it in alignment. And what I do is I put my palm on this back part of the tube wringer and I guide it with my 2 fingers, so it's going between my 2 fingers so that it's not doing this back and forth. And so I'm just going to crank this little dial as it feeds through, and you can see it's coming through and it's crimping. Now usually when I start out I have to feed it through this end or else it's going to end up in a pile inside. Either way, depending on how much you're crimping. But you can see I'm just barely pressing down on this. Well, it's going over the top. Actually, I'd rather have it go in between because I don't really want to press my little crimps out that I've just made. So then you just go back, line up the dial, and continue to lightly press on the back. Okay, now I'm going to show you what happens if you don't stretch this in length. What happens when you do stretch it in length is it compresses all the knit together. So if you don't stretch it in length, the pattern is still there, it's just not as obvious because the material is thinner. So you can see that in this situation, because it's more condensed, the pattern is more obvious. In this situation, not as much. They both work, they just look and work differently. Okay? So that is, now let's just say we're going to just do a part of this and we're embellishing and we want to pull, and then let's say we pulled out just to make a wave, and then I'm going to stretch it this way to condense, and then I'm going to pull again, and then I'm going to stretch it to condense, and I'm just doing that intermittently, just randomly as I choose. So you end up with a bubble, and then line up the wire knits inside of the rollers and just roll it through. And then lift, get your little bubble through the other side, press it down and roll it through. Now, you have to know that whatever I'm doing here with this 1000 series, which is the narrow knit, you can also do with the 2000 series. The 2000 series is about 3.5 inches wide. It starts out like this. This happens to be the chartreuse. And then when you run it through the tube wringer, it narrows down. You know, you stretch it in length and it narrows down. And then this is what happens to it when you run it through the tube wringer. So it creates this really neat pattern and texture. Okay? Now, another thing I wanted to show you is this is actually the, oh gosh, dark cyan is over the fuchsia color. I actually pulled this through using a dowel. I taped this to a dowel and then just pushed the dowel through the tube. And I did that prior to this video so that we could expedite it. But what I'm going to do is just show you, you can do the same thing using 2 pieces of wire knits, one through the other, and it just broadens your color spectrum, that's all, by running a couple of colors together. And you see the pattern? Isn't that great? Look what happens when you have 2 of them running together. Can you see that? I think it's such an interesting, it's almost iridescent because you've got the fuchsia underneath and the dark cyan, which is like a greenish blue, on the top. So again, same thing, stretch randomly wherever you want to imprint, and then run it through the tube wringer wherever you've stretched. Okay, there you go. We're all set. That's the light duty tube wringer. Works great. So this is the heavy duty tube wringer, and you can see that it has metal jaws, or metal rollers I guess they're called, and this is quite marred up from a couple years of me running 18 and 20 and 22 gauge wire through it, and it shows exactly why you don't want to run wire knits through it, because this particular tube wringer, after running several yards lengths of a heavy gauge wire through it, it will mar the rollers, and those rollers will cut into the wire knits. So please don't use this heavy gauge tube wringer on wire knits once you've used it for just bare wire. Another thing I should mention is that because this is metal, I am, as you can see, just working on a table pad, so there's some softness here. But if you're working on a hard surface, you might want to grab like a kitchen towel or a rag or just something that you can, put down on top. And the dial sits out on the edge of the table, off the edge of the table. But this way, when you're working with this, if this moves, it's not going to mar the top of your table. So just remember that. Now I'm going to run an 18 gauge piece of copper wire through the heavy duty tube wringer, and you put the wire into the jaws just like we did the wire knits. Hold it down, put your fingers around the wire so that it guides it. Run the tube wringer to the edge of the table so that the crank is free to turn, and press down heavily, but not so heavy that you're going to break the wire. Again, this is an 18 gauge, so this is pretty thick stuff. But I'm going to press down, and you should really do a few just to try it first to see how much pressure, but you can see it's coming out the back. I'm going to move it up a little bit. And I'm pressing, I could certainly press on this for quite some time without exhausting myself, but I'm putting some pressure on this. The one thing you want to keep in mind is that whenever you're running the wire through the tube wringer, depending on the gauge of the wire, if it's a thinner wire than 18 gauge, be careful because it will cut the wire in half, so you don't want to damage your work before you get started on making your orbital cuff in this case. But I'm just going to finish running this through. Now just look at the imprint that leaves. Look how my finger's pretty dirty from the aluminum here, the metal. But isn't that great? It is wonderful to have something that's so simple to do to add embellishment to wire knits. So you can see in this case I oxidized the copper, but I got that imprint just by running it through the heavy-duty tube wringer. Okay, next we're going to show you some finished pieces, and hopefully that will inspire you to do many, many more things with wire knits. So now I've shown you how to use the tube wringers, and now I'd like to share with you a few of the pieces that I've recently made with the tube wringers. This one that I'm wearing is the 1000 series, which is the fine gauge tight knit in the narrow tube, and it's the color fuchsia. I only used the light duty tube wringer to make this, and I stretched the wire knits in length and then ran it through the tube wringer randomly. So I didn't crimp the entire piece, I just crimped it randomly throughout the meter, which is almost 40 inches. And the back of it looks like this. So now I'll show you a few of the other pieces that I made. And this necklace shows 3 1-meter lengths of the 1000 series wire knits in the copper, the champagne, and the Hannah Brown. And if I take the Hannah Brown and move it, you can see with the contrast of the bust behind how that gives texture and shape to the wire knits. And this again was done with the light duty tube wringer. Here's another one where I actually, for the closure, I actually used one of the pearls that was used in the design, and then I just kept twisting the 1000 series and created a loop and stitched it down with Fireline. So that is the clasp. Very simple. Here is the 3000 series orbital cuff, and it's 18 gauge bare copper wire, and then oxidized and run through the tube wringer and just organically shaped on the orbital cuff. Here's another one where I use the champagne in the 3000 series and a smaller amount of 18 gauge wire. This happens to be a nickel silver, and with Swarovski embellishments on both ends. And those embellishments were actually added as I was running the wire through the tube wringer. So I ran it through the tube wringer, put a bead on, continued to run it through the tube wringer. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to put the beads on once it was run through the tube wringer, most likely, unless they were large hole beads. And the last piece I have is in the 3000 series in the Fire Brick Red, and this is again the 18 gauge nickel silver, and this is the orbital cuff. It's on both sides that are different designs, very simple and a lot of fun to wear. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed watching this, and I've enjoyed making it for you. So this will add some more things, more ideas for your future designs. Thank you so much.